Grief. I guess the opening acts can screw up, can't they? It's the headliners that you're waiting for. Shall I begin, or shall I not begin?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll give you Daniel.
Hello. Hey, old school. Right. Before I begin, can I any techies in the audience, or would regard themselves as a bit techie, and non-techies? And some people didn't put their hands up. Can you do me a favour? Can you just use this as an experience or an opportunity to get rid of all of the buzzwords you've heard and that you hate? So any buzzwords that you currently hear in the media or you've heard over the past few years that you just really don't like, if you just shout them out at me, I'm going to write them on the board and we'll try and deal with them. Use this as like a cathartic experience to get rid of buzzwords. Anybody want to throw some buzzwords? Huh? Hacker. Lovely, hacker. Tech buzzwords.
How about world class?
World class.
Sorry.
Tech buzzwords. What's this session about? Data. Big data, that's the one I'm looking for. Big data. What else? Any other buzzwords? Tech buzzwords. Come on, you can do better than that. This is your opportunity. Get out of your system. Huh? Analytics, beautiful, analytics. Can you tell me if there are different types of analytics that you particularly hate? Predictive analytics, beautiful. So we got predictive. There's a couple of others actually that are lumped into this. There's descriptive analytics. I can't spell. I can tell I'm a computer scientist. Descriptive, whatever. And then there's also prescriptive analytics. Anybody heard of prescriptive analytics? No, well you have now. Prescriptive analytics. Any other buzzwords? Come on, Google if you can't think of any. Cognitive. That's a good word. Cognitive. Next.
Deep learning.
Deep learning. That links to cognitive. Great. You could have been a plant. Deep learning. No, next. More.
Open data.
Huh? Open data. More.
Cyber attack.
Cyber. Is that the hacker, right? I'm going to put cyber attack. Okay. More. Come on.
Metadata.
Sorry?
Metadata.
Metadata. All right. There's some words up there. Maybe if you can think of some as we go, just shout them out. Right? Just get tech Tourette's. Just shout out these random words every time you think of one. Please interject at any time. Anytime. Also, we're in academia, we're in science. So anytime you think that can I swear? No. Anytime that you think I'm talking bullshit, then say, Daniel, that's bullshit, and you need to justify that, or I think that you're wrong. Okay, so we're in science, so you're welcome to use the BS card anytime. Right. So, just before I begin, this is me, and I usually put this up here not really for your purposes, but for my purposes, because it gives me then confidence to actually stand in front of you and actually say some of these things. I did my undergraduate here in UCL with in computer science with actually cognitive science, so that's that word done already. I'll explain what that is later on. I then did a degree, a PhD in complexity theory, computational complexity, or artificial intelligence, and my research interests are in analytics, optimization, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It's a very strange mix. I lecture here at UCL and another university in these areas. I run a master's program with actually Sarah called Business Analytics, which is about using machine learning and all that sort of stuff to try and find insights for business. I spun out a company from UCL called MP Complete Limited. Anybody know what MP Complete means? Amongst you? Good, I'll tell you about that. We'll at least learn one thing. So I run that company. I have another company as well that teaches people how to become data scientists and various other things as well. But essentially my world is data and I bridge both academia and industry. I spend time teaching and running programs in academia, and I want to make sure that the stuff that's created in academia gets out there in the world and creates some impact. Okay? Any questions? No? Okay, let me give you a scenario. I haven't done this before, but let me give you a scenario. John is been married for 20 years. he lives outside of London with his wife, and he has a long commute every day into London. He's a management consultant, and recently John has been acting a bit strange. His colleagues have noticed him sort of carrying bouquets of flowers outside of work. They found some receipts on his desk of him staying in hotels in London. Does anybody want to hazard a guess about what John's up to? Any?
Investors.
Sorry?
Meeting investors.
Meeting investors. Is that investors? You might assume that John is being a naughty boy. But what if I told you that John is, his wife's ill and in hospital in London, and she's been ill in hospital in London for the past 4 weeks? You might then assume that John's a loving husband and has been going to see his wife, right? Yeah, so you made, I guess hopefully some of you made some inference about some data that I've given you, and that inference was maybe correct, but with more information, more data, you probably made a better inference, correct? Yeah? Okay, let me give you another scenario, and again, I haven't done this before, so bear with me. So we have Jane, and she's essentially a power mum, right? I don't know if you've got a picture of a power mum in your head, but she recently saw on her local high street a shop open, a clothes store, and she wanted to go and check the clothes store out, and she went through the doors and she started to look at the clothes in there, but she didn't realize that on the door, on the entrance, there was a sign that had some terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions were that from that point forwards, somebody is going to follow Jane around 24 hours a day and make notes about what she does, what she eats, and where she goes, and essentially take all of these notes. And the aim of that is so that this organization, this company, can get more insights about Jane so that they can give her better recommendations for clothes that she's wearing. All right? That's currently the situation. Now, the guy that's following Jane around is watching her, and he sort of gathers that she's 40 and she's got 2 kids. She likes to exercise, you know, she's really healthy. At the weekend she trains for triathlons, she eats power bars, you know, she drinks the Lucozade and glucose drinks, she likes to date younger men, you know, all these things that you get if you follow somebody around. Now, Jane doesn't know she's being followed. Now, in this guy's experience, he's actually followed quite a lot of people around. This is his day job, and he's seen the profiles of Jane before, and he realized that people with these types of profiles, people that have these types of lifestyles, maybe a bit stressed because they put a lot of pressure on themselves. These types of women that have these profiles, eat these foods and things like that, they tend to be at a very high risk for a particular aggressive type of ovarian cancer, because he's seen those types of women before, and he's seen that those women are develop these symptoms. Should this guy go and tell Jane that information? What do you think? Who thinks that this guy should make Jane aware of that information? Just because by accident he's seen some pattern somewhere else. So, okay, who thinks that you should not tell Jane that she could potentially have some? Okay, that's good, right? Like 50% of you are wrong, at least. Well, actually, I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions. These are some of the questions I think that we need to start asking ourselves. They're very tricky. Because essentially, when you go and sign up to a website or a service on the internet, lots and lots of data is being collected about you, and that data is being used both to benefit that organization, but could be used to sell you more stuff, or could be used to identify problems that you might have and things like that. And I guess this is big data. I'm going to come and define big data in a minute. But I want you to start thinking about some of these positive and negative aspects that could arise from this explosion of data that's being created and gathered. All right? So I'm going to give you a framework that I guess I've been developing for the past few years to try and help you understand data-driven decision making, what data really is, how to make decisions from data, where the challenges are, both the computational challenges and perhaps some of the more philosophical challenges. And then maybe I'll ask some questions at the end, some challenging questions. I'd really like to get your feedback about it. And at any point, if you want to interject and ask some questions, then please do. Any questions so far from anybody? No? Right. So what is data? We've got the word data up here. What is data? Anybody want to make a suggestion? going to write information just before you said it. That's the first thing that everybody says. This is like a cross between a magic trick and a tech talk. So yeah, information is the first thing that everybody says. No, it's not, unfortunately.
Records.
Records. In a minute, I will come on to records, but everybody says information. That's perfectly reasonable to say that, but it's not quite data. You said what? Bytes. Essentially, yeah, data is just symbols, just a bunch of symbols. So if I wrote on the board, I'm not going to write that on the board. If I write on the board here, if I wrote that on the board, what's that? Yeah, it could be a sort code. It could be how much money somebody has in their account. It could be their ID number. I don't really know. As it happens, this is a date of birth, okay, and now it becomes information. What I've done is I've contextualized those symbols and I've turned it into information. So the definition of information is contextualized data. All right? And when you collect lots and lots of data, you typically put it in what is called a database, and that automatically gets contextualized. Oh, just to take a step back, anybody want to guess what big data is? Big data?
Lots of uncontextualized data.
Yes, exactly. Lots, and there's a specific sort of definition for lots, and big data is essentially more data than you can process on a single machine. All right? It's more data than you can process on a single machine. So just think about Twitter, all of the Twitter data. Yes.
Even on a super machine?
Even on a super machine. Typically, a single machine is typically made up of a CPU, a hard drive, some memory, and they have certain limits. Yeah, and these can get quite big. But if you think a hard drive now, a really big hard drive is like maybe 4 terabytes. That's a lot of data. Yeah, but there's more than 4 terabytes being generated in CERN right now every single second, or more than 4 terabytes that are being processed when a Formula 1 car goes around the track. Or sometimes if you want to. We'll come on to that in a second, but it's essentially more than you can store on a single machine. So what happens is there are now technologies out there that help you essentially take lots and lots and lots of machines and make it look like one big machine. So you can store lots and lots of data across lots of machines, and it looks like one big machine, and you can process it all also as it looks like one machine. Now, big data doesn't necessarily mean lots of data. It could mean big chunks of data. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to open up an image that's maybe, 100 gigabytes in size. Yeah, whoa is a good word to describe that. But so, like some medical images, some images that are being produced at CERN, for example, are huge. And if you try to open that up on your laptop, then you're going to really struggle. There's no application on your laptop that can really handle that big chunk of data. And so what typically has to happen is that it gets broken up into little pieces, distributed to all of these other computers, and processed and then brought back together. Okay, so all big data is lots and lots of data or big chunks of data, typically more than you can process on a normal single machine. Okay? Great. So once you've captured all of that data, you can sort of store it in what is called a database, and you give it some context. You say, this is a date of birth, this is an address, this is a name, and it's now turned into information. And there's a whole massive movement at the moment that's happening in the world. Anybody heard of the semantic web? The semantic web, or Web 3.0, or linked data. This is going to change the world. It's amazing, and I'd love to talk more about it. And maybe if there's some time at the end, I will go into some details. But essentially, all of the data that's sort of on the internet, if you go to a web page, it's really just data. It's just symbols. It's words, numbers, and computers really don't know. They don't know what it is. We haven't contextualized it. And there's a huge movement at the moment called linked data, which is a way of tagging this data, labeling this data to give it meaning. So I might have a web page that lists my name, UCL, the things I like, the things I don't like, the people that I work with, and at the moment that's just data. But you can start tagging this in a way where it says Daniel is a man, Daniel works for UCL. UCL is a university. Daniel likes John, and Daniel teaches data science. And these are essentially what are called triples. You've got a subject, and an object, and a predicate, which is something, something, something. Daniel likes shoes. I don't like shoes, but I don't know why it came to my mind. I've said worth things. And what's happening is by tagging data in this way, what you're doing is you're creating a big graph, a big connected graph of information. And I'll show you a picture maybe later on, remind me, of all of the information that's now starting to be connected in this way. Because now what can happen is you can ask Google, you can't ask Google this yet, but soon you will be able to. You can say, Google, give me all of the people that work at UCL that know somebody called Daniel that likes shoes. All right? And at the moment, if you type that into Google, Google's going to come back and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you talking about, you idiot? But at some point, once all data is tagged in this way, then computers will be able to respond and answer those questions. Did you have a question?
IBM's Watson?
Slightly differently, but essentially yes. Slightly differently. And I guess one of the promises of linked data, of the semantic web, is that if we can link all of this data together, both with private data and public data, we've now got a big, big database that we can try and find these insights. So if we go back to our example of Jane, if we can find people that identify people that have a particular type of ovarian cancer because they have this particular type of lifestyle, they eat these types of foods, they have these types of genetics. Previously, all of this data was all separate. It wasn't connected. But by connecting all of this data together, you can now start to ask these questions and find these insights. Yeah? Does that make sense? Excellent. Knowledge, right? We're going to start getting more and more philosophical as we go up this pyramid. Anybody want to guess what knowledge might be, the definition of knowledge? It's tricky. I think a philosopher yeah. Knowledge? Insight. That's good. I like that. That's really good. What happens in industry, actually what happens in academia as well, is if you've got lots and lots of information, so you've got a big database full of information, what you want to do is you want to find insights in that information. And typically what people do is they organize it in different ways. So I'd like to argue that knowledge is organized information. So let's say, for example, I took everybody's date of births in here in this room, and so now they're now in a database. I've got lots of information, and let's say I wanted to plot them. I wanted to see what distribution do we have in this room of people. So it might look something like this, where we've got a peak of young people and a peak of older people. Now, I would argue that we know something now about this room. We've got a peak of young people and a peak of older people. Because we've plotted it, we've visualized it in a particular way that helps us identify a pattern. And actually visualizing data at the moment is super exciting in industry. There's loads and loads of people saying, oh, we should visualize our data and all this sort of stuff. And there's a big boom of visualization tools. People are getting access to lots of data, aggregating it, linking it together, and trying to find these patterns that are in there. And some patterns are cool, some patterns are not cool. And I'll explain later what those are. So we now know that there are two peaks of types of people in this room. But does it mean that we understand why? So if I gave you, for example, another graph, which I could say is this is the share price of some company, and I plotted it in a particular way, so I've organized the information in a particular way. What do we know about this graph? Just basic, yes, it's going up, excellent, gold star. So this, we know that it's going up. Do we know why it's going up? Do we understand why it's going up? No. Absolutely not. And so there's a big difference between knowing something and understanding it. And I would argue that understanding is essentially interpreting knowledge, interpreting things that we know. And that requires lots of other stuff. It requires knowing about weather. Maybe this is an ice cream company. So at a particular time of the year, it peaks because it's hot, for example. And so interpreting these peaks, these patterns, is actually very, very hard, and computers find it very, very difficult to interpret knowledge. Does that make sense? Okay. There's a load of research that happens in academia. That research is typically called machine learning, which is, again, ways of trying to not just find patterns in data, but make predictions from those patterns. So if I were to go back to some of these words, just finding patterns, just finding pictures and graphs and clusters is essentially called descriptive analytics. We're describing the information and we're presenting you with some patterns. The next step is to try and predict what will happen. And we could get a computer to look at this and try to predict whether the next step of the next time of that graph goes up or down. can you predict what will happen? And what the computer the computer will look at this data, look at all sorts of other data, and make some prediction. Now, it's very, very hard for the computer to tell us how it's making that prediction, but this is essentially the world of machine learning and predictive analytics. And I would suggest that people are getting really quite excited about this world now, but I think that it's limited, and it's limited because computers might be able to make predictions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they understand what's going on. And I think one of the things that we had a kind of like a flash crash of the stock market in 2010. Some algorithms were doing some trading, and some anomaly happened, and they all started to sell, or something like that, which caused a crash. And that's because they found some patterns and they reacted to some of those patterns, but they didn't understand what was going on, so they behaved stupidly. All right, so I think that we need to have the human here to help us understand how to interpret and understand those patterns and contextualize them. Okay, finally, once we've found some patterns and some insights in data, in information, what we now need to do is make some decisions. And decision making is hard. I'm going to give you an example in a minute why decision making is hard. The example I like to use is, let's say we brought together some data sets, some weather data sets, some, I don't know, football match data sets, payday data sets. So I know that this weekend there's going to be two teams that are playing that are traditionally quite rivalry. I know that it's hot. I know the sun's going to be out, and I know that it's payday. What's going to happen? It's hot, payday, and two rival teams are going to be playing. What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
Huh?
Right.
More crime, yeah. So you might be able to predict that there's going to be more crime. And there might be less crime if it wasn't payday, because people can't spend all their money on booze. Or if it was wet, then people might want to go home. Right? So with with 3 data sets, we might be able to predict that there's more crime. So what? We might predict there's going to be a 10% increase in crime. And we've interpreted why, because it's hot and people are boozed up and the football team's playing. But now we need to make some decisions based on that insight. Right? We need to figure out, well, how many police should we distribute to our resources? How many police should we send there and not affect the rest of the system? And this is the wisdom part, which is making decisions or applying our understanding. Is that cool? Yes?
What is the essential difference between what you're talking about here and, let's say, traditional statistics?
Statistics help you process information and find more information, and essentially, let's say, for example, if I wanted to find the mode or mean or median of a particular data set, I'd be able to know that the mean was here, or I'd be able to know that the mode was here, which is essentially just extracting more information or just extracting knowledge. It still doesn't mean I understand why. Yep?
That's where regression and significance testing comes in. I think that's a very limited definition of what statistics is.
Well, I'm not trying to define statistics. I'm trying to explain where statistics is used in this pyramid. So statistics is typically used around here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't what I asked.
Okay. But ask it again. I'll try and answer it. What's the definition of statistics?
No, I said what is the essential difference between what you're talking about here and traditional statistics? I'm trying to understand better what you're telling us and what's particular to computerized data as opposed to what we're used to in statistics.
Okay, so statistics will allow you to process data in a particular way, but the algorithms that are used in statistics, some of them can make predictions, so regression, like you say, can make some predictions, but statistics isn't used for decision making. So let me give you an example. Actually, this is a really nice example. Sorry?
I said what?
Well, no. Okay, so statistics can't tell you what the shortest path is around this. This is a map of London. There are 25 points. If you wanted to know what the shortest distance is around all of these points, statistics is never going to be able to answer that question. All right?
Right.
You're
That answers my question.
Excellent. That's why I created this slide. Just so you're aware, this is called the traveling salesman problem. It's a classic problem in computer science. And it's very hard. And these types of problems appear in industry and academia all the time. Let me explain what's going on here. So let's say you're a logistics company and you want to deliver some packages around London. And this is your depot down here, let's say. And you want to know what the shortest path is around all of these different points. And so typically what happens in industry is that you have humans that are sort of drawing a best guess around all these different points, and for the most part people think that they're solving those problems quite well, but try not to look at this slide at the moment, but if you've got 24 points on a map, then there are essentially this number of possible combinations of routes. Right? There are 24 times 23 times 22 times 20. You put that into your calculator, 24 factorial. 24 factorial, and yet this number of possible routes around these 24 points, so essentially that. And so if you had a computer that could process 1 million routes every second, so that could look at 1 million routes every second and say, this one here is the shortest one, this is the one that's going to save you the most amount of petrol, the most amount of time, then it will take 20 billion years for a computer to come up with that solution. All right? If I had another point to this map here, it would be 25 times 20 billion years, which is 500 billion years. If I had another point to the map, it's 26 times 500 billion years. All right, and so these problems exist in industry. Anybody ever done any staff rostering for restaurants and things like that? Those problems are insanely difficult. They're being solved very, very badly. And you think about all of the different types of logistics and delivery problems that are out there that are being solved. So there's a whole aspect of computer science that are dedicated to try and figure out how to solve these problems efficiently. Nobody knows whether these problems can be solved efficiently or not. And humans think that they can make decisions here in an efficient way. Like, for example, allocating your police force to try and minimize the overall impact on the system. Okay, these are called NP-complete problems, and or in this case it's an NP-hard problem, and they are very, very hard to solve. And if you can solve these problems, by the way, you get $1 million and you become world famous and you've changed the world. Nobody knows whether you can solve these problems efficiently or not. So just to go back to the pyramid, kind of industry, if we were to look at industry, are here. They've got to the point where we can aggregate lots of data, we can link it together, we can do some statistics and do some graphs and present some people with some graphs, and then leave it to the human to then go and interpret those graphs and make some decisions. And interpreting graphs is hard, and I would argue that making decisions is perhaps harder. And so this is kind of where we're at. And so again, there's a huge amount of research in academia that are trying to sort of solve or address this aspect of the pyramid. And it's important here just to mention the word algorithm. The word algorithm gets used all the time. The algorithms that are used here to try and do either the statistics or the pattern finding are different, very different to the algorithms that are here that make decisions. And if you are all working in industry, or if you go out into industry, I think it's really important that you understand the difference between that. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Excellent. So I think what's going to happen over the next number of years is that industry are going to become more and more sophisticated about modeling the world, using algorithms to solve and make decisions based on what's going on, and learn from those decisions. And I did my master's on intelligence, and the best definition of intelligence I ever found was this one: goal-directed adaptive behavior. So you have a goal, and I usually use the example of a human. So if I'm here, a human, and my goal is to exit the room, this is kind of what happens in industry. I gather some data. I mean, it might not be a lot of data. I might have one eye closed and my fingers in my ears or something like that. So I gather some data, and I build a model of the world, and then I set out a plan to execute what I want to achieve. And what happens in industry typically is they close their eyes and they start executing that plan. All right? And they keep executing the plan until something bad happens, and they open up their eyes and they reassess the situation, close their eyes, and start executing the plan. And that's not, of course, how we operate as biological things. We are constantly bringing in data. Every time we make a move, the world changes. We create some data in the world. The world is changing around us. We're looking at our competitors. We're looking at people moving around, and we can adapt to that. So I would argue that probably the most important word in that definition is adaptive, is an ability to adapt to the changes that are happening. And typically that doesn't happen in industry because this is not a closed loop. It's left to the human to make some of those decisions. But eventually we'll get to the point where the computers are making those decisions, and the humans can help them learn and adapt more efficiently. And I would argue that that's really where artificial intelligence starts. It's a place where computers can make the decisions themselves and learn from those decisions. Now, artificial intelligence is very different to artificial sentience. Whether we can create a machine that has sentience is a whole different different it's a whole different talk. But I think that this is the model that we should think about when we're thinking about data-driven decision making. And I think people will start to migrate from this part, migrate from making decisions, and start to be here looking at the system and making the system better. Does that make sense? Okay. So we've done that bit. Right. So let's go back to our big data examples and also this idea about there being a dangerous idea. So the question is, what data should we capture? I think maybe you have an appreciation that if we have lots and lots of data, then maybe we can make better decisions because that data is good data. If we don't have good data, then we're going to make stupid decisions, right? If we, so one of the questions I have for you is, should all data be open? You're emitting data right now. All of you are probably emitting data, and you're posting things on Facebook, and your kids are posting things on Facebook too. And by the way, you're linked to your kids. If your kids are posting, saying that they're ill, telling people where they're going on holidays, I can take that information. I can make inferences about how much money that family has, or what illnesses that family has, because you're linked genetically and linked in other ways. So even if you think you are being anonymous, if your siblings and things like that aren't, then I can make some smart inferences about that. Yeah? So the question is, given that there are a handful of companies out there that probably essentially know everything about you because they can make smart inferences, what would the world look like if all data was open? If your bank details were open, if your, I don't know, your medical records were open, what do you think that world looks like? Is it a scary world? Is it a world where people will not commit crime because it's easy for them to get found? What does that world look like?
Short-term chaos.
Short-term chaos, yeah.
Probably depending on how fast authorities can gain control of that and get to know, say, the criminals who are.
Yeah, well, so let's say, for example, I made my bank account details open. I gave somebody my password and things like that. Now people can look at my details. They could even, if they wanted to, take money out of my account. But assuming that all my data is open, then people could see who's taking money out of my account. So do you think that they would self-police themselves? This comes back to a thing that Plato wrote in the Republic, which is about the myth of Gyges. Anybody heard of the myth of Gyges? Is a farmer finds a ring and he puts on the ring, he goes invisible. It's like Lord of the Rings. And what does a human do when they have anonymity? What does a farmer do? Any guesses? Rapes the queen, kills the king, takes control of the kingdom. That's essentially what happens because he has that power of anonymity. And one of the things we might want to ask ourselves is that if we were less anonymous, and I'm not advocating this, I'm putting it out there, then would people self-police each other better? Would we make more sensible decisions? Would we judge each other less? Things like that. What are your sentiments? What are your feelings about that?
I think there'd be more discrimination.
More discrimination? I think there'd be less. I think that people judge each other on how many cars they have and the size of the house. And if you knew that person has been through struggles and worked really hard in their lives and cares less about money and cares more about happiness, then I think that I could be wrong. I also think that if all information and all data was open, I think we'd be less interested in knowing things about each other. I think that we like to know things about celebrities and things like that, but I suspect if a celebrity made themselves completely open, we'd get bored very quickly. I don't know, is Big Brother still on the TV right now? Has people got bored of that? People got bored? I don't know the answers to these questions, but these are questions that we should be asking. So yeah, any thoughts about that? Any thoughts about all data being open?
I think a problem is how well people would understand what it is they're seeing.
Yeah.
And the sort of chaos of just having too much data. You know, I read somewhere that about 6 choices or even less is the most that people can handle.
Yeah.
So we would get a different set of problems. It would solve quite a lot of things, and you know, I mean, I'm a libertarian, so that my inclination to say yes, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's open it all up.
Yeah.
But then one knows how readily one is misunderstood.
Yes.
So that's where we'd have to think very hard about it.
Sure. Okay, another question, I agree. Another question that I might pose to you is that when you go and sign up with an organization, sign up with a company, give them your details, your date of birth and things like that, they have those details, and you can go and ask them for those details. You can say, what information do you have on me? Now, it might be that some organizations are using that data, using that information, and looking at other people that they've acquired information from, as with Jane, to make some insights about you, some inferences. Now, some of those inferences might be correct, some of them might be wrong. But let's say an organization was making some inferences about you that was detrimental. Let's say, for example, this organization, this clothes shop, said to Jane, there's a likelihood that you've got ovarian cancer. And she gets ill or stressed out because of it. Whose responsibility? Who's responsible for that? Let me ask you a slightly different question. If I make some inferences about you, do you have the right to know those inferences? If I infer that you're going to actually have a heart attack at a very young age because of your lifestyle, and therefore I'm not going to be giving you any insurance or anything like that, do you have the right to know the inferences that are being made as opposed to just the information that I've given that organization?
Reminds me of Gattaca.
Gattaca, yeah, that's indeed. Yeah. Well, this is a question. I mean, and I think that this world is emerging. If you go and yes.
I don't think you should tell Jane that she's in risk of dying, because what you've done with data, what we're all doing with data is giving away bits of our freedom. But if you then decide to tell Jane this important piece of information, you completely remove her freedom.
This is,
yes?
there's a thing about that, medical kind of stuff. If you're over a certain age, which I am,
yeah.
And your blood pressure's a certain way, which it is, then you've got a 10% risk of X, and therefore you should do Y, without kind of checking the other reasons why I shouldn't, because I'm all right with my brain, etc. I mean,
You can use this as a therapy session as well if you want.
but the bit that's important is the variance.
Yep.
So if Jane's told there is an X% risk of somebody with all the bits we know about you
Yep.
Developing this illness, fair enough. But what you also need to know is the variance.
Yep.
Because the other thing is that nobody knows at this point in time when everybody's changing like Jim,
Yep.
you know, exactly how old a person has to be before they have to kind of, you know, take statins or some horrible thing that's going to kill them.
Yeah, you raise a really good point there, which is, and also I'll come back to your point about freedom as well, I think, which is sometimes it's very, very difficult for us to understand what are all the different parameters that are affecting this thing. And I would, if we go back to the sort of visualization example, I know, organizations are using lots of really cool visualization techniques to try and find patterns in data, but I would argue that visualization is limited in some way. Well, it's limited by us, our capacity to deal with a certain number of dimensions. I can imagine kind of like the most that we could deal with is if we were in a 3D environment with like bubbles in there with different colors going bigger and smaller, changing through time. So if I was imagine sort of navigating this data set in this 3D environment, that's like 6 dimensions there that I'm dealing with. Maybe I can lick it or I can prod it or something like that. I can use my other senses, but really 6 or 7 are really the only, the maximum number of dimensions that I feel like I can handle. And so it might be that there are correlations, there are things that are going on that are really difficult to articulate to the person. Mediating variance. I forgot that we're in a statistics department. That's hence the statistics questions. I should have planned for that. I did a very bad big data analysis on this talk. I should have thought about my audience. Well, okay, so I'd like to learn more about that. But I guess also the curse of dimensionality and all of this sort of stuff as well comes into play. And again, that then begs the question: is that can we sometimes understand? Can a human understand the complexities that exist within these data sets to appreciate how the computers are making the decisions or the inferences that they're making? Or should we just trust that the computer knows because we don't have that capacity ourselves to understand? So there's another question for you. What stage, how much do you trust the
Perhaps you could actually ask the individual at what level they're agreeable with offering their freedom for information. So if it's, for example, preventative health, preventing somebody from getting breast cancer.
Yep.
As soon as you're 50 years old, you're given an automatic screening.
Yep.
And I think that could reduce your chances of getting X, Y, Z.
Yep.
But I think it's the choice of an individual whether they want to know or not.
I think you mentioned the word choice and freedom there, which comes back to your point, which is if we're using computers to make, so let's say I'm gathering lots of data about you, and I'm the clothes company again. Is it a good thing that I use that information to try and give you things that I think that you will like, or should I just give you the choice to choose anything? Am I helping you sort of find things that are going to be best for you, or am I removing your choice, removing your freedom by making some of these offers?
Let's say if you're a clothes company, gave me a list of the things that I could actually gain from the service that you're providing, either by knowing which articles to read or pushing different bits of information to me.
Yep.
Perhaps it would be my choice to decide what I want to know.
Yeah.
And what I don't want to know.
Yeah. That's yeah.
So I'm not just pushed
Yeah.
loads of adverts and things like that willy-nilly.
Yeah.
I'd rather be more directed towards what I wanted.
You seem very rational about it. I heard a story recently that I don't know how true this is. I think it's true, but I guess when you're deciding on whether you should know or not know, you'd have to sort of maybe trawl through some agreement, or you'd go through a process of making those decisions. I don't know if you've heard this story, but there's a company in Canary Wharf that started to provide free Wi-Fi to people, and if you sign up to their terms and conditions, which of course nobody reads, nobody is as rational as you, they now owe them their firstborn. And so they now legally obliged to give that company their firstborn because they've signed up to some terms and conditions that nobody's had the patience or whatever to agree to.
Bible story about that.
That's probably where they get it from.
But maybe you develop an app to read your terms and conditions for you.
Sorry? Yeah, that's a great idea. In fact, actually, I read an article recently that there's a company that's developing an app that, like, when you're surfing the internet, it randomly clicks on all the advertisements just to create noise in the data, which I think is awesome. Right? I don't know. So I get adverts now for, like, well, I'm not using it, but I can imagine get adverts for, like, lingerie and all this sort of birth control. I don't know, but yeah. So there are people obviously out there that are concerned about privacy and are putting in sort of retaliation to this big data world. Big data, I think maybe I appreciate now, has the promise to really potentially help us, right? We can imagine, and we're in UCL, we maybe subscribe potentially to utilitarianism, the greater good if we all came together and somehow shared our data in a maybe a private way, I don't know how that would happen, to benefit the rest of society, would you be prepared to do that? Would you be prepared to open up your data to an organization so that they can try and find insights that are going to help the rest of the world? Yeah. If you trust their intentions.
The NHS does that.
The NHS is trying to do that, yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of work within UCL around personalised medicine and digital health and things like that. So that, again, these are all questions I don't know the answers to, but people in this room are potentially going to go out and try and answer them. There was another question I was going to ask, but I can't remember what it is. Any other thoughts about this emerging world? Is anybody worried about this emerging world? I'm pretty convinced that it's going to happen, or it is happening. Yes?
I think the problem with, for example, those companies or whatever websites that tell you what you could potentially like based on the stuff that you have already input.
Yep.
It's a kind of limiting, it's a thing that actually does limit yourself. It's based on this idea that you are something,
yeah.
that it's an unchangeable thing. We can now infer something about you, and that's the way it will stay. So that we propose you those things, which will definitely mean that for the straight of the logic you will become more.
Yeah.
What about what is inferred from you in the first place?
Sure.
So it kind of kills any possibility for you
to diverge. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, now I listen to classical music, so I'll be proposed classical music for those new apps that tell me what music I like. I go on a dating website and I'll be proposed those people that I would potentially like because of what they click.
Yeah.
But it kills all the idea that
I think
I do not actually wanting this.
I agree, and that's a very, very common response. If I was another big data architect or I was running the big data world, then I would try to throw in noise actually to these systems to say, well, maybe just randomly I might show you some classical music, and if you like it, I've learned from that, and I can then show classical music to other people that have your profile and inspire them in a way that they weren't going to be inspired before. Does that make sense?
Isn't that the whole point of intelligence?
Yes.
When you were saying it's a focus-directed, sort of adaptive
Yes.
that learns that she doesn't like classical music anymore. She likes, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the adaptive, isn't it?
Yeah, but
It-
where does the
it-
liking come from? That's the
It
question.
evolves with you.
Sorry?
Like the question is, where does the liking come from? If this mechanism learns that you don't like something, the question would be for me, like, why don't you like it anymore? I mean, that's kind of like inherent complexity
Yep.
of a human being.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's part of the. Maybe you had sort of a traumatic childhood over with with classical music. Yeah.
As you were talking about the sort of the art of offering your information and for that then to be used to infer things
Yeah.
for you, perhaps, that are helpful, I then had a question that if, say, you decided that you didn't want your information to be used by the NHS to then make inferences for people generally of your age group and then to help future information,
Yep.
would any inferences made, those inferences that are made, would you who have not provided your information still be
Able to benefit from it?
able to benefit from something that you didn't really provide
Yeah, it's a good question.
foundation for?
I don't know.
Is it fair that, I mean, it's much simpler when I pay for something, I get a service in return.
Yeah.
So my information is almost like paying,
Yep.
you know, giving that information so that I do get a return on that
Yep.
investment of my intelligence or my body or whatever my
Yep.
circumstances are. So where does that
I guess from the NHS perspective, they don't want you to get ill. So if they can help you not get ill and not it be a cost to them, then it doesn't matter whether you have given that information or not. Maybe in another situation, in a more commercial situation, then that won't be true. And there's been quite a lot of thought around how we can get ownership of our data and how we can commercialize our own data. I don't think anybody's nailed it at all, because I think that we freely sign up to these services and we give lots of our data away, and it sort of spiraled a little bit out of control. So I don't know how we're going to regain that right now, and I guess those are some of the things that I'm interested in. I don't know what time it is. What time is it? Oh, great. That's good timing.
Can I just
Yes,
put a
please.
script to that?
Please.
Because I mean, it seems to me that the commercialisation is the problem.
Yes.
The debate that's gone on for a long time about open source material and the Wikipedia model, if you like,
Yep.
and how well that works and how counterintuitive it is that it works as well as it does.
Yep.
And I think that's certainly in terms of Google and what they know about oneself, it's highly problematic. But one's choice is limited, because if you are a complete refusnik to all that, then you cut yourself out of so much.
Yep.
And that is the difficulty. It gives this appearance of openness.
Yes.
But it is so skewed by the capitalization.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm going to be doing a TEDx talk next Saturday on this subject, and I was kind of using this as a bit of a forum to try out some of the ideas. And I guess there is this challenge, which is if we allow the power to the people that want to commercialize our data, then it could spiral off in a very negative.
It's doing it already.
Yeah. Whereas if we perhaps came together as a society, then we could start to use this use the data that's out there to try and solve real world problems. And we should be rewarding those people that are dedicating their time in the evenings and the weekends to sift through these data sets, to link them together, to build technologies, to find insights in them. I think we should somehow be rewarding those people. And I don't know how we can do that, rather than rewarding a company for providing us with a nice pair of shoes. I'll use shoes again, whatever. And yes, so it's a real challenge. And yes.
That's where my point about discrimination comes from, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Aspects.
Yeah.
So will you get a job if all your health information is freely available?
Yeah.
They've determined that you're planning for a child. Will you
Yep.
what will happen with that?
Yeah, what if you get some racist algorithms, right? You develop some algorithms that are just racist. Who's responsible for racist algorithms or sexist algorithms? I don't know. Are companies responsible for, again, making those inferences? And if we did own the inferences that were made about us, then perhaps companies would be a lot more careful about making stupid inferences. Yes?
So what do you think we can do to convince companies that people are aware?
My initial gut response, and I don't think it's right, is to not use them. Is to use companies that are willing to use our data for good. But I don't know how that can be. I suspect companies will want to continue to get our money. And to be fair, if I have a choice between an insurance company that's using my data to sell me insurance versus another insurance company that's going to be using my data to sell me insurance and also give me insights about how I can make better decisions in my life, then I'll be going towards the better decisions company, right? So I suspect that companies will not just provide commercial products, but also they want to try and help you and better your decision making. Yeah.
Who at the moment holds these companies accountable?
Do you know what? That's.
You have a company like Google which passes so many different continents and is available in space as it is on Earth.
Yeah.
At the moment, space isn't really policed. There
No.
is no policing for space.
The government are meant to. So the government, I think in Denmark recently there was a law that was passed that you could only have data on people if you could provide a business case for it. But I think that's easy to sidestep. I think the governments are probably meant to put in policies that will prevent companies from using your data maliciously. For example, if the government put in a policy that said you have to own your inferences, then that might change the way organisations behave. And that policy doesn't exist at the moment. But I do some work with some think tanks and around big data. And some of these are some of the things that I'm trying to lobby about, potentially open data and owning our inferences. But I think who's responsible? We are, partly, and perhaps the government as well. We choose what products we want to buy. We have a choice. And I think if we're smarter about buying those products, then it's the good companies that will win and the bad ones that will fail. Yes?
I mean, obviously this raises a
whole load of questions.
And the question of choice that you've just put in, how many people go past the first page of Google?
That's right, yeah.
So in what sense do we choose?
Yeah.
And how you get those sorts of presences.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that I think it's really great that it's raising these sorts of questions because I think that's one of the ways in which we will begin to get at least some different ways of approaching, because so many times it's just the same old.
Yep.
Whereas the questions of how we reconfigure the notion of accountability, for instance, because I don't want to be policed anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
I think policing is a rotten idea.
Yeah.
So what does that require? That requires some more collective kind of decision making.
Yep.
And these are the sorts of things that big data and so on could potentially facilitate.
Yep.
So that the model of government could change. So that it really opens up.
And I think I should probably stop there because I couldn't have asked for a better close. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to be around, so if you have any questions, I'd love to go to the cafe or the pub and talk about this more. I'm sure there's lots of things to talk about. But now it's in your minds, go and change the world like we do in the Department of Engineering. Right.
By the way,
Yes.
just